What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den. It's Tuesday. Time to check out some new releases that are coming out this Friday, October 3rd. There's about 400 albums that are coming out this week. I got 12 on my list for today. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. Like I said in the intro, there's about 400 albums that are coming out this week, but I'm only going to talk about 12 on the show today. So if something you're looking forward to that I'll have on here, make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you're looking forward to grabbing. And like always, if you're unable to find these in your local brick and mortar stores, they should all be available online. I'll put links down below in the comment section for them. You can also always go over to the Vinyl Den store on Amazon. All the pre-orders are on there. There's new releases. There's deals on records. All sorts of cool stuff to check out. Before I get into the list for this week, I do want to say that the Mother Love Bone, Apple, and Shine releases from last week, they did get pushed back, and they're going to be released this week, so they're coming out on the 3rd. Of course, you've also got all the Rocktober stuff that's coming out over the month of October, starts on October 3rd also. I think there's I don't remember how many releases there are. I did a whole video series on all the Rocktober releases if you want to go back and check those out, but that all starts this week also. But I think the big release this week is easily going to be the new album from Taylor Swift that's coming out. This is Life of a Showgirl. It's her 12th studio album. There's multiple variants of this with alternate artwork. It's all going to run you about $37. So after working with Jack Antonoff on her last 5 albums, she goes back to work with Max Martin and Shellback on this new album. And while I think she created some great albums with Jack, I think the last album she did, I thought was just kind of okay. Actually, I think the stuff that she did with Aaron Dessner on that album was actually better than the stuff that was produced by Jack Antonoff. So, albums like Lover, Folklore, Evermore, those were all great albums. I think by the time she got down to that 5th album with Jack, I think it was just time for a change for her. And since she's worked with Max Martin on some of her best albums, one of which being 1989, which I've long considered one of the best, if not the best, pop album of the 21st century. I'm glad that she's going back to a very successful partnership she's had before. Musically, I'm interested to see if she goes back to a little more of that more like dance pop centric kind of stuff that she did on Reputation, 1989, the albums that were produced by Max Martin, or she kind of continues with a little more of that darker imagery that she's had over her last couple of albums. Because so far she hasn't released any music off this new album. So I don't know really what direction she's going to go with it. But regardless, it's going to sell a lot of copies this week when it gets released. I did a video on the channel about a week or so back about vinyl record sales numbers being down about 1% for the year. Her releasing this album will definitely help that. Whenever she releases a new album, sales numbers go through the roof. I will say my issue with her releasing this album is the rollout of all the different variants. Generally, I don't have an issue with different variants, press as many copies of it as you want. I mean, heck, the Rolling Stones did, 40 different copies or 40 different variants of Hackney Diamonds when they released that album a couple years ago, and no one really blinked an eye at it. So I've got no issue. If you're going to do a bunch of different variants, press whatever you want. I really don't care. My issue is when you roll those different variants out in stages. I don't know. I just don't like the way they rolled them out. If you don't know, she put up the standard version on our website for pre-order, and then a couple of days later they put up 2 different variants and people bought those up, and then a week later they put up a couple different variants again, and they've done that multiple times instead of just putting them all up. If you want to do 10, 12, 15 different variants of your album, I really don't care. Just put them all up at one time and let people buy what they want from it. Just don't do it in stages and make people have that FOMO, because collectors out there are going to buy 8, 12, 15 different copies of it just because they don't know what different pressings are going to be, or what colors are going to be. I don't know. That's definitely the issue I have with this. Generally, like I said, I don't have a problem with all the different variants, but I just have an issue with the way they rolled that one out. But that was coming out this week. You've also got a reissue of Purple Rain by Prince coming out. This was released back in 1984. It's going to run you about $100. So this is a Because Sound Matters one-step pressing, which I don't have any of these pressings in my collection, but I've heard nothing but incredible things of the pressings they've done so far. This is going to be limited to 6,000 copies. So I know they've done a couple of Green Day releases. I know they've done a couple of Linkin Park albums also. And I think Because Sound Matters is actually listening to fans, because that's been the kind of knock on Mobile Fidelity and analog productions over the last couple of years is, people like these more audiophile pressings, but all they're doing is repressing all those older albums from 40, 50, 60 years ago that people have other pressings of, People want to see these more audiophile releases of more modern rock albums, and that's what Because Sound Matters is doing. And yes, Purple Rain is an older album, but I think this is the oldest album that they've done in their one-step pressing releases so far. I think it's kind of hard to argue against Purple Rain being one of them. I mean, it is one of the greatest albums ever recorded. Personally, it's not my favorite album from Prince, but I think it is his masterpiece album. It was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. It hit number 1 on the Billboard 200. I think it spent like 25 or 26 consecutive weeks at number 1. It sold over 25 million copies worldwide. It was just a massive album when it came out. It cemented Prince as one of the cultural icons of the 80s. So if you're a company like Because Sound Matters, it makes sense to take an album like Purple Rain and do a big audiophile release of it. There's one album that's long overdue to get reissued. That's finally getting reissued this week. This is Unplugged by Alicia Keys. Came out back in 2005. 2 LP release. Is the 20th anniversary release. It's going to run you about $33. This is the first time it's ever been reissued since it first came out in 2005. And it's an album that I've had on my want list on Discogs for literally years. And I've said for a long time, this might be one of the most underrated Unplugged performances. And when this was released, it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. And it was actually the highest charting album or highest charting release for an Unplugged album since Nirvana back in 1994. And it was also the first Unplugged album by a female to debut at number 1. It's an Unplugged album, so of course it has, all those stripped down versions of all her classic songs on there. But actually, my favorite song on this album is, she does a great cover version of Wild Horses by Rolling Stones on there. I think it was that song was the first song I heard off this album. That's what made me go back and listen to the entire thing. And like I said, it's a great album. If you're unfamiliar with her performance, at least go back and stream it. It's definitely one I'm going to grab this week when it comes out. Then you've also got What's the Story, Morning Glory getting reissued. Came out back in 1995. It was Oasis's second studio album. So this is a 30th anniversary deluxe edition that they're releasing this week. It's a 3 LP release. It's going to run about $80. This is one of those defining Britpop albums of the 90s, and it helped make Oasis global superstars. And off the top of my head, if I was to rank the top 25 albums of the 90s, I'd probably have What's the Story, Morning Glory somewhere in that top 25. So what you're getting in this deluxe edition is the original album on 2 LPs, and then you've got this third LP that's got 5 new Unplugged songs on there, all mixed by Noel Gallagher. And I read online that the audio for this album was supposed to be remastered. But I also read somewhere else that the audio that's used on the standard album in this deluxe edition is the 2014 remaster. So I'm not really sure if this is newly remastered or not. I would bet that's probably not, that it probably is that 2014 audio on here. As they did when they released the anniversary edition of Definitely Maybe. It does come with alternate artwork. I do have a copy of this already in my collection. I would like to have a copy of it. $80 is a lot to drop for it, especially since it only has 5 additional Unplugged songs. This is one of those albums where if I can grab it on sale somewhere, eventually down the line, maybe I'll grab one. But since I already have one in my collection, I don't need to have one this week. Something I was a little surprised to see reissued this week is All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. It came out back in 1970. It was his third studio album. It's a 3 LP release. It's going to run about $111. So this is just a reissue of the 50th anniversary box set that came out 5 years ago. I mean, it is a great album. It was the album that made me understand the brilliance of George Harrison. It was an album that proved to me that George was very much an underutilized force in the Beatles. I know George did write a handful of songs for the Beatles, but I think he definitely should have had a bigger role in the writing process for the band. And George would go on to release other great albums in his career, but nothing would ever equal what he did with All Things Must Pass. I think it is a masterpiece of an album, one that would go on to influence musicians for decades to come. And as far as like solo albums from the Beatles, it's one that I would put, if it's not at the top, it's definitely near the top of that list. I picked up a copy of this when it got released for the 50th anniversary, so I can pass on it this week, but it is going to be available if you're looking to grab a copy of it. And then you've got the expanded edition of Pieces of You by Jewel coming out this week. This was released back in 1995. It was her debut studio album. 30th anniversary, it's going to be on 2 LPs. It's going to run about $37. This album not only helped lead the folk pop revival in the middle part of the 90s, but it's one of those albums I've long said, really helped open up the doors for a lot of female musicians, a lot of singer-songwriters in the middle part of the decade. At least after this album got popular, it seemed like there was a lot of like Jewel-like artists that started gaining traction in the mainstream. So I think this album had a lot to do with a lot of other female artists, at least the momentum in the mainstream. This is one of those like essentials 90s albums. Like I said though, this is an expanded edition, so there's some extra content. There's 5 additional bonus tracks, which I think they're all previously released. There's a 25th anniversary box set that came out 5 years ago. All 5 of those tracks they're included in this or in that box set. So I think it's the first time that they've ever been available on vinyl, but it's coming out this week. I've got a copy of it in my collection. What I say, this $37. Yeah, I don't know. I might grab a copy of it this week. We'll see. If those extra tracks, I think they are available on streaming. I'll stream them and see if I like them. Maybe I'll grab a copy of it. I was a little surprised to see this next album on the release list for this week because it actually came out last week. But this is a new album from The Living End, I Only Trust Rock and Roll. It's their ninth studio album. It's going to be on pink vinyl. It's going to about $43. So Living End, they're banned out of Australia, so it takes a week before their albums get released here in the US. So it does make sense. But this album has been available through their website and on digital platforms for a week now. This is a follow-up to their 2018 album, Wonder Bar, which I thought was a really good album, but I haven't listened to the entire thing. I've only listened to, maybe about a third or half of it so far. Their debut album was one of the best punk albums of the later part of the 90s, and really their first 3 or 4 albums were really good, but I think they kind of lost a little something after those albums. It really wasn't until about a month or so back that I finally started going back through and started listening to some stuff off of Wonder Bar, just kind of get a sense of what to expect for the new album. And honestly, I've only listened to 2 songs off the new one, and I think it's better than anything I've heard off of Wonder Bar. I haven't listened to the entire album yet, even though it's been available for days now at this point. So I don't think they'll be able to recapture the magic that they had on those first couple of albums. This is very close to what they did on those earlier albums, so I probably will grab a copy of that when it comes out this week. So you got that coming out. Then you've got the new album from Mayday Parade. This is Sad. It's going to run you about $25. So this is part of a larger project that the band started doing earlier this year when they released Sweet. So Sad is actually the second part of a 3 EP release series that they're doing. This is going to be on black and clear vinyl, and then the band is going to release Sugar at some point in the near future. It's going to be that'll be the third and final part of this series. And when the band released Sweet earlier this year, I thought it was just okay. It's definitely grown on me since then. I still don't think it's as consistent of an album as what the band has released previously, though. But from what I understand, for the second EP, it sounds like the band is trying to change up the tone a little bit musically for the second one. So I'm kind of interested to see kind of the direction that they take with it. So it's another one I'll add to my list to check out this week. A couple of interesting jazz releases coming out this week, both part of the Blue Note Tone Poet series. These are always mastered by Kevin Gray from the original analog tapes. They're pressed to RTI. They always sound fantastic. The first one was Bobby Hutcherson, Montara. Came out back in 1975. It's going to about $39. So musically, this is a different style jazz album from Bobby. It's fused with Latin, soul, and funk. I think it's kind of widely seen as one of their better jazz funk fusion albums of the 70s. And interestingly, decades later, it would go on to be a highly sampled album from hip-hop artists. The 70s were a really interesting decade for jazz music. I think jazz music was becoming very experimental in the decade. It really started pulling in all these different other genres, whether it's soul or funk or acid rock or all these other very experimental pieces, which I think really separated it from the jazz from the 50s and the 60s, which is why I think when you look back earlier decades, I think the 70s was probably the most experimental decade for jazz music. I don't have a whole lot of 70s jazz music in my collection. I think this is definitely one of the better ones from that decade, so I probably will grab a copy of that this week. And you've also got Stanley Turrentine in Memory Of coming out. This came out back in 1979, even though it was recorded back in 64. It's all same stuff. It's mastered by Kevin Gray from the original analog tapes. It's pressed to RTI. It's going about $39. And I'm not exactly sure why the 15-year gap from the time it was recorded until the time it was released. It was recorded on June 3rd, 1964 at Van Gelder Studios in New Jersey. It's got a great lineup on this album with him, though. He's got Blue Mitchell, Curtis Fuller, Herbie Hancock, Bob Cranshaw, Otis Finch on drums. It blends Stanley's usual style of hard bop with more African-style beats. And it's an album I think, really should have been released back in 64 when it was recorded. And I think had it been released in the 60s, I think it would definitely been looked at as, one of the better jazz albums released in that decade. I think it's definitely Stanley's best album. There's also Ultraphobic by Warrant getting a reissue this week. Came out back in 1995. It was their fourth studio album. It's going to about $33. This is an album that was never available on vinyl until earlier this year. And when this came out earlier this year, I think it was 2 different pressings. There was a limited pressing on colored vinyl. I think it was 500 copies. And then there was a standard pressing on black that was more widely available. I think there's a restock or reissue of the standard black pressing. By 1995, rock music had very much moved on from those hair metal days that helped make, Warrant one of the biggest bands in the world. And with Ultraphobic, Warrant really showed that they were a band that they had evolved with music. It was very much more of a 90s alternative style album, and it very much fit into that 90s alternative rock scene. I think because the music stylings of Warrant from the late 80s and early 90s were so different than what music was in the middle part of the 90s. I don't think anyone really gave any credit to Warrant and really even paid attention to Ultraphobic when it came out. But they really missed out on a really good album. Is it Nirvana Nevermind or 10 by Pearl Jam or really anything from Soundgarden or Alice in Chains? No, it's not to that level of quality of music from the 90s. But I would say that Ultraphobic is still a lot better than a lot of the other alternative rock garbage that's being thrown out in the middle part of the decade. I've long said it's an album that had been released by any other band other than Warrant, it would have been a much more popular album. But, it's one, it's at least worth checking out. If you're unfamiliar with the album, at least go online and stream it and check it out. It is coming out this week. It's one that, I don't have a copy of it. I do need to grab a copy of it when it comes out this week. And the last album I got on my list, this is Suicidal Tendencies, Lights, Camera, Revolution. Came out back in 1990. It was their fifth studio album. So this is music on vinyl pressing, so it's going to be a little bit more money. It's running about $40. So it's limited to 2,000 copies. It's going to be available on red vinyl. So Music on Vinyl actually released this album back in 2013. I think this is just a reissue of that same 2013 pressing, except for in 2013 it was on turquoise vinyl and this is on red. Other than that, I think it's the same release. The album was a surprise hit for the California thrash band in the early part of the 90s because, even though music was very much changing, around 1990, thrash was still not very popular in the mainstream. I will say this was the band's first album with Robert Trujillo on bass, who of course would go on to become the bassist for Metallica. And he brought a little more of like a funk style to the band. And I think that might have played a little bit better in the mainstream, and that's why maybe the band got a little more traction. Well, the album hit number 101 on the Billboard 200. It would go on to be a gold album here in the U.S., which were both huge for a thrash band in the 90s. My only question for Music on Vinyl is, for them, there's so many other albums that have been long overdue to get reissued that Music on Vinyl has in their catalog. Why pick this album when this album is actually still, readily available to pick up a copy in your local record store? Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you're looking forward to grabbing this week. As far as Taylor Swift goes, yes, I've got a copy of it on order. I pre-ordered the standard version of it when it went up for pre-sale. I didn't know, my wife pre-ordered a copy of it also, so I've actually got two copies coming. I don't know which one. She didn't pre-order the standard version. She's got one of the alternate covers coming. But so I do have two copies of that coming. I probably will grab the Unplugged Alicia Keys. I probably will grab that Living End album. I probably will grab that Bobby Hutcherson album also. It might be kind of an expensive week for me, but let me know what you guys are looking forward to. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a little thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.